What really happened to Ricky Nelson? For 40 years, the mystery lingered, rumors of betrayal, neglect, and a tragedy that could have been prevented. Ricky Nelson wasn't just a pop idol. He was America's first TV son, a rock and roll pioneer, and one of the most recognizable faces of the 20th century. But the deeper you look into his life, the darker the truth becomes. The mystery has been solved, and the truth isn't good. Ricky was born Eric Hilliard Nelson in 1940, the second son of Ozzie and Harriet Nelson, entertainers who weren't just raising a family, but building a brand. The Nelsons didn't want an ordinary home. They wanted the perfect American family that could be packaged and sold to a nation hungry for post-war optimism. When Ricky was just 8 years old, he was drafted into The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet. To the world, it looked wholesome. Millions tuned in weekly to watch the Nelsons eat dinner, share jokes, and solve life's small problems. But behind the camera, childhood vanished. Ricky's playmates weren't kids from school. They were cameramen and crew members. His homework was done under hot studio lights. His childhood wasn't lived, it was performed. Privately, he was a frail boy. Asthma plagued him, forcing him to sleep beside a vaporizer just to make it through the night. His mother, Harriet, kept up the smile. But Ricky often lay awake, struggling to breathe. "I didn't choose fame," he later admitted. "I just grew up and everyone was watching." That sentence tells you everything. He was never given a choice. Still, there was one place he found freedom: music. In 1957, to impress a girl who liked Elvis, Ricky recorded "I'm Walkin'." It wasn't meant for the world, it was meant for her. But the single exploded, selling 1 million copies in a month. The shy boy became a rock and roll phenomenon overnight. By 18, he was one of America's biggest stars. And yet, even then, Ricky was being carefully managed. Every dime he made went into his father's hands. He was earning millions, but living on an allowance of $50 a week. Later, Ricky confessed with bitterness, "I had money in the bank, but I had to pick up soda bottles with my girlfriend to afford movie tickets." Imagine being adored by millions while still being treated like a child in your own home. That was Ricky's reality. By the early 1960s, Ricky Nelson was everywhere. On the radio, in record stores, on television. He wasn't just another singer. He was one of the first true crossover stars, moving seamlessly from the sitcom living room into the world of rock and roll. His records sold in the millions. His face smiled from the covers of teen magazines. His concerts drew screaming fans who rivaled the hysteria surrounding Elvis Presley. To America, he had it all. But Ricky Nelson's world was never his own. His father, Ozzie Nelson, ruled the empire with an iron hand. What Ricky wore, what he sang, where he performed, and even how he spent his earnings, every decision was filtered through Ozzie's control. By the time Ricky turned 18, he had generated over $500,000, a fortune worth millions today. And yet, the boy who fueled that empire was given only $50 a week. "I had money in the bank," Ricky recalled years later, his voice tinged with disbelief. "But I had to pick up soda bottles with my girlfriend just to afford movie tickets." The boy America adored was behind the camera, a puppet with golden strings. Songs were chosen for him, not by him. Image was crafted, not lived. His life became a script he could never put down. A close friend once said, Ricky never looked fully comfortable around Ozzie, always second-guessing, always shrinking back into silence. Ricky himself admitted, "I felt like a character written for television, not a real person." Still, he tried to carve out something real. In April 1963, Ricky married Kristen Harmon, daughter of Heisman-winning football hero Tom Harmon and actress Elise Knox. It was marketed as the union of two dynasties, America's teen idol marrying Hollywood royalty. The wedding was splashed across tabloids, fans lining the streets just to glimpse the golden couple. And for a while, it looked perfect. They moved into a Spanish-style villa in the Hollywood Hills. Their first child, Tracy, was born later that year, followed by twin sons Gunnar and Matthew in 1967, and the youngest Sam in 1974. Ricky doted on them. He taught the twins guitar chords, doodled cartoons for Tracy, and cherished the quiet moments with little Sam toddling through the living room. "They were my sanctuary," he once told a friend. But sanctuaries have cracks. As Ricky's music career entered the late 1960s and 1970s, the sound of America changed. Psychedelic rock, folk, and country rock began dominating. Ricky struggled to evolve. His attempts to mature musically were met with mixed reviews. Critics sometimes dismissed him as yesterday's teen idol. He once confided after a concert, "They don't want me, they want a memory." Kristen, meanwhile, wrestled with her own struggles. Fame's aftermath left her isolated. Red carpets gave way to school lunches and sleepless nights. He was gone even when he was home, she later admitted. Friends of the couple noted how arguments grew sharper, silences heavier, and Ricky, emotionally drained, seemed more distant with each passing year. By 1980, after nearly 2 decades of marriage, Kristen filed for divorce. What followed was bitter and brutal. Ricky lost over $1 million in legal fees alone, a devastating financial blow that mirrored the emotional scars of a life unraveling. Tracy later described it as, like watching a beautiful home catch fire and nobody had a hose. Ricky himself said with quiet regret, "I tried to save a marriage I didn't understand was already broken." Kristen, too, admitted, "I loved him, but we were both lost." And yet, out of the ashes of that broken marriage came something unexpected. Because just as Ricky's personal world collapsed, he found the one person who would change everything, Helen Blair. She entered Ricky Nelson's life not with fanfare, but with quiet devotion. In 1980, as his marriage to Kristen Harmon fell apart and his career drifted in uncertain waters, Helen Blair appeared, a woman the public barely noticed, but who became indispensable to Ricky himself. Helen wasn't a starlet, nor did she crave attention. She had modeled part-time, worked as a tour assistant, and knew the exhausting rhythm of road life. Unlike so many who orbited Ricky, Helen didn't see him as an icon. She saw him as a man, weathered by expectations, scarred by years of control, yet still searching for peace. To Ricky, that was revolutionary. Friends immediately noticed the difference. He was calmer with Helen around. He smiled more easily. The edge of restlessness that had trailed him for years softened when she was by his side. "She doesn't try to fix me," Ricky once told a bandmate quietly. "She just lets me breathe." By then, his divorce from Kristen was already unraveling in public. Their split was finalized in 1982 after long, bitter legal battles that drained Ricky financially and emotionally. Helen didn't cause the collapse. She walked into its aftermath. Yet that didn't stop critics and even members of Ricky's family from judging her. His mother, Harriet, never approved. Some fans dismissed her as a hanger-on, but Ricky didn't care. He once said, "For the first time, I feel like I'm not being watched." Helen herself understood her place. She wasn't trying to be the center of attention. "I don't need a ring," she reportedly told a close friend. "I just need him to know I'm here." And she was, always in the background, always just off stage, always beside him when the lights went dark. In photographs from the early 1980s, the difference is striking. Ricky, so often tense and guarded, looked softer, his eyes warmer. Helen's presence had given him something he had spent a lifetime seeking: quiet. But peace rarely lasted in Ricky Nelson's life. And Helen, the one person who had given him stability, would also be with him during his final, most terrifying moments. December 1985 was supposed to be triumphant. Ricky and his Stone Canyon band were touring small venues across the South, and though they weren't playing stadiums, the shows were full. His music, so often dismissed in the press's nostalgia, still drew crowds who had grown up watching him every week on television and singing along to his records. On December 30th, at the Guntersville High School Auditorium in Alabama, Ricky performed 2 sold-out shows. The setting wasn't glamorous, wooden bleachers, a school stage, but to the fans who packed the room, it didn't matter. Ricky's voice still carried the same magic it had in the 1950s. Teenagers clapped along. Parents whispered to their children, "That's the Ricky Nelson I grew up with." Backstage, Helen was everywhere and nowhere all at once, helping the band pack up instruments, making sure Ricky ate, ensuring schedules stayed on track. To outsiders, she was just another member of the touring crew. To Ricky, she was his anchor. "She kept the chaos off his shoulders," one bandmate later said. That night, as the band relaxed after the show, no one knew they had just witnessed Ricky Nelson's final performance. On December 31st, 1985, New Year's Eve, Ricky, Helen, and the Stone Canyon Band prepared to fly from Alabama to Dallas, Texas, for a concert scheduled that night. The plane waiting for them was Ricky's own Douglas DC-3, a gleaming relic from the 1940s. To fans, it looked stylish, even romantic. But to pilots, the DC-3 was outdated, safe only with meticulous care. And Ricky's plane had a dark secret. Its gasoline-powered heater had been malfunctioning for years. Smoke sometimes leaked into the cabin. Repairs were temporary. Warnings were whispered. "That heater's a death trap," one mechanic reportedly said. But nothing changed. The plane kept flying. The heater kept failing. And on that final day, the silence surrounding those warnings became fatal. At 12:40 p.m., Ricky, Helen, and the band boarded. Spirits were high. The skies were clear. Ricky cracked jokes with the pilots. Helen helped load baggage. At 1 p.m., the plane lifted off, carrying the group into what should have been just another routine flight. For nearly 4 hours, all seemed fine. Ricky leaned back in his seat, Helen beside him, their bandmates laughing and planning for the Dallas show. But at 5:08 p.m., 35 miles west of Texarkana, everything changed. Smoke began to seep into the cockpit. The pilot's tense voice cut through the airwaves. "We've got a little problem. We'd like to turn around. We have smoke in the cockpit." Inside, panic spread quickly. The cabin filled with acrid fumes. Band members shouted for extinguishers, but the smoke thickened. Heat radiated through the walls. Helen clutched Ricky's arm, terrified. He tried to keep her calm, but there was no escape. The air grew hotter, blacker. Breathing became impossible. At 5:14 p.m., radar contact was lost. The DC-3 plummeted into a cow pasture near DeKalb, Texas, skidding through power lines before erupting in flames. Eyewitnesses recalled the horror. One farmer said the plane looked like a wounded bird trailing smoke. Another described the explosion shaking the ground, flames shooting into the sky. First responders rushed to the wreck, but what they found was devastation. The cockpit windows had blown out from the heat. The pilots, burned and dazed, managed to crawl through and survive. But inside the cabin, everyone else, Ricky, Helen, and 5 members of his band, perished in the inferno. In the days that followed, investigators combed through the wreckage. The findings were chilling. A hole in the heater duct, molten fragments of metal, scorch marks showing the fire had started exactly where the heater was located. The co-pilot's testimony was even more haunting. He claimed that, before the flight, the pilot had whispered to him, "Don't tell anyone about the heater." That one line became the echo of Ricky Nelson's final moments. The plane should never have flown. The warnings should never have been ignored. And Ricky Nelson's death wasn't a mystery of fate. It was the result of silence, negligence, and decisions that cost 8 lives. Ricky didn't die in the spotlight. He didn't die on stage, guitar in hand. He died choking on smoke, holding the hand of the only woman who had loved him without conditions. And to make the tragedy even more cruel, the world would try to erase her from the story entirely. The crash made headlines across the world. On New Year's Eve, 1985, while much of America raised glasses to celebrate, the nation also learned of a tragedy. Ricky Nelson, the boy who had grown up on television, the heartthrob who sold millions of records, the pioneer who blended pop and country into something new, was gone in flames at just 45th. Los Angeles braced for the funeral. On January 6, 1986, 250 mourners gathered at the Church of the Hills in Forest Lawn Memorial Park. It was not simply a memorial, it was a spectacle. Cameras lined the streets, tabloids dispatched reporters, fans carried flowers, vinyl albums, and handwritten notes pressed against their chests as if holding on to Ricky one last time. Inside, familiar faces filled the pews. Connie Stevens, Angie Dickinson, John Fogerty, even Colonel Tom Parker. The air was heavy, thick with grief, but also with silence, the kind that follows sudden, senseless loss. Yet as mourners opened the programs, one absence screamed louder than the hymns. Helen Blair's name was nowhere to be found. Helen, Ricky's constant companion of 5 years, had died beside him in that burning DC-3. She had been his confidant, his partner, his calm in a storm. And yet at his funeral, she was erased. His mother, Harriet, who never approved of her, reportedly insisted Helen not be mentioned. To the Nelson family, she was invisible. To the world, she was reduced to a girlfriend, her devotion cut away from the official narrative. Her parents begged for her to be buried beside Ricky. Their request was denied. Helen died holding Ricky's hand. Yet in history's first draft, she vanished as though she had never existed. In the days following the crash, investigators from the National Transportation Safety Board descended on the charred wreckage scattered across the Texas pasture. What they found painted a picture not of fate, but of failure. The fire had originated near the airplane's gasoline-powered cabin heater, a component notorious among pilots for its temperamental design. The ductwork was scarred black, twisted with heat. Fragments of molten metal were scattered through the wreckage. It was clear the heater hadn't just failed, it had burned the plane from the inside out. For years, pilots had complained about smoke in the cockpit. Maintenance crews had flagged issues. The heater was an open secret, a ticking time bomb hidden behind nostalgic charm. But in the aviation world of private charters, shortcuts were common, and safety was too often left to chance. No one grounded the aircraft. No one insisted on repairs that would stick. And then came the most chilling detail. In sworn testimony, the surviving co-pilot admitted that just before takeoff, the pilot leaned over and whispered, "Don't tell anyone about the heater." A warning not to passengers, not to authorities, but to silence. That single sentence became the ghost of Ricky Nelson's final moments. Tabloids tried to twist the tragedy, fueling rumors of drugs or reckless living. But the truth was darker in its simplicity. This was not a rock star's recklessness, it was systemic negligence. A plane with a known defect was allowed to fly. A silence around its danger sealed the fate of everyone on board. The NTSB's official report stopped short of assigning blame. The fire's cause was listed as undetermined. But those who knew Ricky, those who knew the plane, understood. Silence killed him. The mystery was solved, and the truth wasn't good. It was unforgivable. Back in California, grief spread like wildfire through Ricky Nelson's fractured family. News of the crash didn't just arrive, it detonated, shattering the fragile bonds that fame and years of turmoil had already strained. Tracy Nelson, Ricky's eldest child at 22, collapsed when she heard the words. To her, the announcement didn't feel real. She later described that night with searing clarity. "I couldn't move, couldn't speak. It felt like the air had been ripped out of the world." Tracy had grown up watching her father balance music, touring, and personal demons. Yet nothing prepared her for the finality of death. Overnight, she was thrust into a strange role. The adult anchor of a family still reeling from decades of public scrutiny and private heartbreak. For Gunnar and Matthew, the 18-year-old twins who shared their father's musical passion, the loss carried its own cruel twist. They had been scheduled to meet Ricky the very next day, ready to share songs, stories, and the kind of father-son moments they always craved. Instead, they were asked to step before flashing cameras, microphones thrust into their faces, and mourn publicly while their own grief was still raw. Gunnar later admitted, "We didn't just lose a dad, we lost our foundation." They had grown up idolizing Ricky, not just as a father, but as a symbol of what music could mean. His sudden absence left them hollow, their lives forever split into a before and an after. And then there was Sam, the youngest, only 11 years old. He was too young to fully grasp the weight of the tragedy. In the weeks that followed, he lingered by the door, waiting for the sound of footsteps, the familiar click of the lock. "I thought he'd come back," he later admitted softly. "He always did." To a child, his father's return from tours had always been a promise. Now that promise had been broken in the cruelest way. Harriet Nelson, Ricky's mother, aged overnight. Despite years of tension between them, despite disputes over money and control, she adored her son. His death gutted her. Friends whispered that Harriet never truly recovered from the loss. Once the matriarch of a family empire, she was left with silence, staring at a world where her beloved boy had been stolen too soon. Kristen Harmon, Ricky's ex-wife, grieved in her own way. Their marriage had ended in courtrooms, battles over custody and money, years of bitterness that seemed to leave only ashes. But grief has a strange power to soften what anger hardens. Kristen, once the Hollywood princess who married the clean-cut teen idol, admitted later that she had never stopped loving him. The man she had fought with, the man she had left, was still the father of her children. His death, no matter how complicated their history, broke her. And then came the financial storm. Court filings revealed that Ricky's estate, once worth millions, had dwindled to barely $500,000 at the time of his death. Years of legal fees from his divorce, questionable investments, and the costly machinery of fame had drained him dry. For a man who had once earned fortunes from television, touring, and record sales, it was a cruel irony. His once vibrant Hollywood Hills villa, once alive with music and laughter, now stood abandoned. The plaster cracked, windows shattered, paint peeled from the walls. A once glorious home was reduced to a hollow monument of what had been lost. Even in death, Helen Blair was denied dignity. Her parents filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the Nelson estate and the charter company, desperate for recognition of their daughter's role in Ricky's life. But the settlement was modest, barely covering expenses. No headlines followed. No public memorial was offered. Like Helen herself, the lawsuit faded quietly into the background, erased from the larger story as if she had never mattered at all. But to Ricky, she had mattered. In life and in death, Helen Blair was the only one who had given him peace. That truth, like Ricky's music, could never be erased. And yet Ricky Nelson's story did not end in that Texas pasture. His voice, tender, plaintive, and full of longing, refused to be silenced. Even as his family mourned and the press dissected the tragedy, his music continued to echo through radios, jukeboxes, and living rooms across America. In 1987, he was posthumously inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It was a long overdue honor. For years, critics had dismissed him as just another pretty face, a teen idol, who stumbled into stardom because of his famous parents. But in death, they were forced to confront the truth. Ricky Nelson had shaped the sound of modern American music. By blending country, rockabilly, and pop with effortless charm, he laid the foundation for what would later become the country rock movement. Without Ricky, the Eagles, Linda Ronstadt, and countless others might have sounded very different. His children carried the torch. Tracy Nelson, his eldest, became a respected actress. She faced her own battle with cancer, stage 2 Hodgkin's lymphoma, and survived, showing the same quiet resilience that had defined her father. Gunnar and Matthew turned to music, forming the band Nelson. In 1990, their debut single, Love and Affection, soared to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. It marked history, the first time 3 generations of one family, Ozzie, Ricky, and his sons, had all topped the charts. Sam, the youngest, chose a quieter path, but honored his father's legacy in private, appearing at tribute events and supporting his siblings. Fans never stopped listening. His records continued to sell. His story inspired books, documentaries, and tribute concerts. His face adorned posters and vintage memorabilia. And in living rooms across America, his voice still crackled from vinyl speakers, reminding listeners of a man who gave everything to music and lost nearly everything else to silence. The Ricky Nelson mystery is no longer a mystery. It was solved not by rumor, not by tabloid speculation, but by hard evidence and by silence that spoke louder than words. The truth isn't good. Ricky Nelson didn't just lose his life. He lost it because warnings were ignored, because a heater was left unrepaired, because silence killed. And yet, his voice lives on, not just in records or television reruns, but in every broken heart healed by his songs, in every family who remembers watching him grow up week after week, in every fan who still plays his music to feel young again. Ricky Nelson's story is one of talent and tragedy, of devotion erased, and of silence that proved deadly. But his music never fades. If this story moved you, share it with someone who remembers Ricky's golden years. Leave a comment below with your favorite Ricky Nelson song or memory, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more haunting stories from Hollywood's past. Because some voices, like Ricky's, never truly fade away.